So Sally, do you know, I didn't even know who you were until literally last week. And then I found out who you were and what you've been doing with your life and what you're doing with your life now. And I was like, wow! Here's this amazing woman teaching everything that I'm most passionate about and living it and embodying it and has been doing for so many years of her life. And witnessing you teaching in your workshop, it was just 3 hours, but I really felt the embodiment and the transmission and the authenticity, and it was just so inspiring. So I just first want to say thank you for that again, actually.
Thank you.
I feel quite emotional actually saying that, yeah.
It's very beautiful, Shakti, and clearly we have a connection, which in the end is what it's all about, right?
Yeah. And the thing that I was reading your biography and I saw that you used to be a journalist.
Yeah.
So I'm going to ask you about that because I'm curious. Was that before you got into all of this or as well as? What was that part of your life?
Well, I was a journalist in New York City. I worked for the Village Voice just after I got out of college, and then became a freelance magazine journalist. Okay. So for about 10 years, I was doing magazine journalism, mostly on culture and the arts in New York.
Yeah.
And in the early 70s, I was in my apartment with my boyfriend, and we were sitting listening to a record, and I tell this story since we're talking in London. I'll tell you what the song was. Yeah. It was a record by the Incredible String Band, which was an English folk group of that time, and we were listening to the song, and all of a sudden I began to be aware of literally clouds and torrents of love just overwhelming me. And with that, the recognition that this love was the truth, and that I had never known it, and that it just completely altered my priorities, changed my direction in life. And the next morning, I was working on a novel, which was about all the, terrible miscommunications between men and women and romantic suffering and those types of modern literary topics. And the next morning, as I contemplated the experience, I realized I can't write this novel because it's all about suffering, and I've just realized that there's something beyond suffering. So that was the start. And I then in New York in the 1970s, the early 1970s, there weren't many places that you could go to practice yoga.
So had you been doing any yoga, spiritual practice?
I've been doing no spiritual practice. I was actually kind of a typical left-wing countercultural 70s New York girl. And so, and the only place you could go, at least that I knew of in my neighborhood, was to the Integral Yoga Center, which was one of the early Satchitananda-based, from the Shivananda tradition. Mm-hmm. So I used to go there and do a sort of easy yoga posture, and then lie down in Shavasana and have this experience of peace and sweetness arise. Mm-hmm. So life went on and things continued to unfold, and about a year later I got involved with a Western spiritual teacher who did a 3-month training based on essentially on a Gurdjieffian model, although he was...
Could you say that again? What was that?
Do you know who George Gurdjieff?
Oh, yes, yes.
So it was essentially based on the Gurdjieffian model,
okay,
perhaps related to the Sufi schools, mm-hmm, but quite a full spectrum, integrated kind of immersion in the purpose of spiritual practice, body, mind, spirit connections, and so began actually meditating quite seriously, and gave up my career because the pull, the allure of spiritual practice was so powerful for me. And then about a year later, and after a number of different types of awakening, I met my teacher, who was an Indian guru called Swami Muktananda, who was on a tour of the West in Los Angeles and had a very profound sense of connection with him. And a couple of months later, decided I would travel with him for a couple of months, and ended up staying. So I traveled with him around the United States and then Europe.
So you became like a disciple?
I became a full-time disciple.
Can I just ask you something? Because that seems like a very rapid, from the way you describe it, seems like a very rapid shift of being from one kind of pathway in life, I suppose, like this, and you were saying you had lots of little awakenings along the way.
Well, the shift
or was that
was the awakening. In other words, the shift was in my tradition and in the general tantric understanding about what awakening is. There, of course, we have many different types of awakening, some very subtle.
Yeah.
But that was an extremely dramatic reversal of my understanding about what the purpose of life is. Because when you have that kind of download of cosmic love, it comes with a inbuilt certainty that what you're experiencing is reality. And it's very hard to describe, as I know you know. But the effect of it was that my goals and ambitions shifted. So, in other words, instead of having the kind of ordinary goals and ambitions for someone my age, that is, who's my next boyfriend going to be, who's going to buy my next article, when am I going to finish my book, all those normal things. I suddenly was, how can I deepen my connection to love? So it took about a year before I became a kind of full-time, but not exactly seeker, but spiritual practitioner. And I would say, extremely fortunate in that because I had communication skills, because I was a journalist, I was attractive to spiritual teachers, because in spiritual communities, especially in those days, that they actually need people who can translate the language of traditions into language that Westerners can grasp.
Right.
So I somehow was able to, in this first spiritual group I was involved in, I was able to do full-time spiritual practice and receive enough of a stipend so that I could live frugally in a communal setting. And and then when I began traveling and practicing with my guru, I became his press officer. So and he just took care of me in the traditional Indian guru disciple model, which is to say, you get a bed, you get food, and anything else you're on your own. But it enabled me really to enter into traditional practice and a traditional guru disciple relationship without the issues that that people normally have to deal with.
Right.
Which is how am I going to balance my family, my career, and my spiritual practice? I just got to go whoosh, right into it.
Straight into it.
Yeah.
So you say typical spiritual practice. So for somebody watching this who might not know, give us an idea of what your daily spiritual practice looked like.
Now, at this point in my life?
Well, at that time, when you were with your guru.
At that time, it really depended on my guru, who his teaching, his public message was meditate on yourself, meaning meditate on the Atman, on the inner self, on the consciousness, the awareness that is your true nature. And so meditation and the importance of meditation was was primary for him. And in fact, he considered his mission in life to be what he called a meditation revolution. So, in other words, he had come to the West in order to offer meditation to Westerners, which was, aside from the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, who of course was a much more public teacher of meditation than my guru, but meditation was, at that time, considered weird and esoteric in mainstream circles. So he taught the public meditation in our actual relationship, that is, with his close students. There was an enormous emphasis on service, on seva, which is also how it is in most spiritual groups, as you probably know, and which is a form of karma yoga. So in other words, you're doing work for the organization in the spirit of offering it to God or offering it to the Guru. And in my experience, that particular path will tend to purify your, let's call, to use technical yogic language, it will kind of purify your egoic ambitions and your attachment to the fruits of your work. And, so it's a very integrative practice, because we would meditate, or I would meditate for about an hour a day. We chanted quite a bit, a lot of Sanskrit text chants. But mostly what we did was seva and all of the interpersonal glitches and interesting things that come up when you're working with a group of people doing your work as an offering. So it was actually a practice of character transformation that I think can only take place in Sangam, in a group of people truly dedicated with all our imperfections to spiritual progress. So that was, it was a training situation that it's very hard to replicate these days. But it was a kind of a traditional Gurukula situation in which...
So you talk about this guru and disciple and the Sangat relationship. So for someone who's not familiar with that setup, what is the importance of that? Do we need to have a guru to progress spiritually? Or is that just something that obviously you're blessed to have that experience? When I tune in my yoga practice, I always affirm that the guru is within. So talk a bit about that, perhaps the guru relationship and what that really means, what that signifies.
Well, first of all, of course, the guru is within. And the guru-disciple relationship is a path, like the path of meditation or the path of hatha yoga. And so it exists on many different levels. And on the most immediate level, a guru is a teacher, and as we know, in order to master anything, it's very, very helpful to have a teacher. So that said, I'm a teacher, you're a teacher. There are many teachers who can actually help you make progress in a particular practice. And it's, as I'm sure you know, it's very valuable having a teacher who you respect, who knows what they're doing, who knows what they're talking about. So that's one level of guru-disciple. Guru, in that sense, in India people address their grammar school teachers as Guruji. So guru is just a teacher. In the tradition, in the guru-disciple yoga, which is kind of the hallmark of the traditional tantric paths and the traditional devotional paths. And, in fact, the guru-disciple relationship in Indian esoteric yoga is considered paramount. So, and there's a lot to say about whether it's necessary or not. For me, it was. And, I would say there are a whole raft of issues and questions that have come up about gurus and what is a guru and what is an appropriate guru-disciple relationship especially as that path has come to the West, you know, in the last 40 or 50 years. So, you know, the upsides and the downsides of a guru-disciple relationship are a whole topic of discussion, which I don't think we want to go into.
No.
For me, it was very positive and very, very life-transforming.
And during that whole time, where you were Guru Muktananda, so then were you being celibate, so sort of completely out of being a householder type person?
I was being celibate. I was living a classical ashram monastic life. That said, it was not, I mean, if you think of ashram or monastery, you think of like a Trappist monastery, or where everyone's silent and everyone's, you know, going around doing prayers and chanting. So this was not like that. First of all, he had a very public life, and there was a lot of, he traveled a lot, certainly for the first 2 years I was with him. So it was always within a context of a lot of meditation, a lot of chanting. But it was public, it was sociable, it was, you know, there were a lot of other people involved. But yes, I was celibate, and that was one of the, let's call it mores or customs. If you were a serious student in that tradition, unless you were married, you were celibate. So it was classical, you know, Indian religious framework. So, and it turned out, actually I'm going to do a full confession thing here. My experience when I met him was of a very, very profound heart transmission that literally, you know, gave me an experience that the only other time I'd ever had it previously was on ecstasy. It was really dramatically love-infused. And my immediate experience in the weeks and months after that was that all the energy in my body wanted to center in the heart, and that sexual expression was no longer interesting, because this was so much more ecstatic than physical sexuality. And so my celibacy was not some kind of heart, you know, wrenching choice that I made because somebody made me do it. It was really, it really happened very naturally.
I would like to transition, I guess, from that to then inquire as to where the Tantra came in. Because when I think of Tantra, I do think of embodied sexual energy as well, not necessarily expressed as having sexual activity with another, but it's certainly embracing the sexual energy also as part of the meditative practice and awakening, I suppose. So was that something that then was open to you through your discipleship, or did something else happen along the way to open that aspect up for you?
Well, let me define Tantra.
Thank you,
as I practice and teach it.
Thank you.
So there are many, many tantric traditions. And the North Indian tantric tradition that the Vijnana Bhairava comes from, which is it's part of an approach to Tantra that's often called Kashmiri Shaivism, although the technical name for it is Trika, and Trika means the practices that show you how to integrate God, the world, and your individual self. Those are the three. Or, you know, the masculine aspect of the divine, which in that tradition is called Shiva, the feminine aspect of the divine, which of course is called Shakti, and how you as an individual can recognize that you yourself are an embodiment of that supreme awareness love, Shiva Shakti, which is manifesting as you, as your body-mind. So the sexual aspect of Tantra in the tradition that I learned and practiced is very much not emphasized.
So you were speaking about how the everyday is fully embraced, and there's one thing there that I'm curious about that I think people watching this would really love to hear you answer, which is when we experience something that feels incredibly intense or difficult or challenging, I have a lot of people coming to me who are going through depression or breakups or problems with abundance. So there's always these everyday life challenges.
Yeah.
So how do these practices, how is this relevant to that?
Yeah. Well, of course, my position is that the key to ending suffering, the key to working with suffering, ultimately comes down to where do you identify yourself. So the practices of Tantra are aimed at taking you from here, that is our ordinary identification with our limited self, which is a position in which suffering is enormous, because in our limited way we are so subject to our economic conditions, to our relationship conditions, to all of the external pressures and forces that human beings are subjected to. So of course, as you know, the essence of spiritual practice is to learn to shift your identification, so that you are able to, through practice of coming back again and again and again to the question of who am I really, what is real, such that some part of your attention, cultivated usually through meditation, because that is the classical practice, is able to know that no matter what is going on in my body, no matter what is going on in my family life, no matter what's happening to my external life, some part of me knows that the truth of myself is untouched by anything that goes on in the outside, which doesn't mean you don't suffer, it doesn't mean that you don't try to deal as skillfully as possible with everything that comes up in your life. But the gift of meditation is that you start to be able to make the distinction between your true self and the play of Shakti as the body and mind. So, to me, the really essential tantric teachings, even though there are many, many tantric techniques that are, many of which are the basis of a lot of contemporary spiritual practice, including affirmations and imaginative exercises where you imagine your future goal and, imagine yourself before you go for the job interview successfully interacting with the interviewer such that the interviewer offers you the job, that you can actually use your imagination. This is a tantric technique to transform your experience of yourself and your experience of your external life. Nonetheless, the deeper purpose of Tantra, as of all, non-dual practice, is to recognize that behind everything is God, behind everything is the true self, behind everything is love. And every practice that you do is meant ultimately not only to help you cope, which many of these practices can do, but also to help you realize that coping is just a strategic part of living your human life, and that ultimately something else is more deeply true than the situations that are arising. So the thing I love about tantric practice is that Tantra holds in both hands, so to speak. In one hand, the recognition that you are not this, you're not your thoughts, that you are awareness itself. On the other hand, holds the recognition that this entire world, including your body, including the people in your life, including the sofa and the pillow and the air and the floor, are utterly imbued with divine awareness, and therefore must be respected, loved, and also have a lot to teach you. So let's say you are a form of Shakti appearing in my world at this moment, and the interactions between us are part of my path and your path. So not so that what you do, what you say, what you eat, what you think, etc., can be looked at as a path to help you understand the sacred nature of everything in the world, and even which is what I call the core tantric attitude. So though there are many techniques, including the simple techniques of just stopping and taking a breath and returning to center, or learning how to move and walk in such a way that your nervous system is supported and allowed to be tranquil, and many other practices. That the really transformative thing is really the capacity to recognize yourself, capacity to turn towards love, which sounds really simple and easy, but is the thing that makes the big difference.
Yeah, thank you. So I have one more question, although I'd love to ask you questions forever, but which is on the goddess and being a woman. So you're a woman, you're embodied as a woman, and you're a spiritual teacher, and you spend a lot of time with a male guru, and you've written this book, Awakening Shakti. So I'm curious to know about your connection with embodiment as a woman and how that fits in with your spiritual life and practice, and the importance for you of connecting with the goddess.
Well, I think, first of all, that in traditional Eastern teachings, there has long been the idea that you cannot attain enlightenment in a female body. It's kind of imbued in many of the Eastern traditions, including many of the Indian traditions and Tibetan traditions. So the realization that there's a particular path for souls in female bodies that has a lot in common with the path for men, but actually has some unique features that actually have to do with the nature of embodiment as a woman.
Yeah.
So I think for many women, contemporary women who have walked a traditional yogic path, especially with traditional male teachers, including teachers like mine who were not male chauvinists, but who really did see through the form to the soul and taught the soul. Nonetheless, there's a certain point where we start to realize that feminine empowerment is kind of a particular thing that women as such need to accept, acknowledge, and uncover in themselves. So part of the tantric understanding that has made a lot of difference to me is the recognition that power itself is feminine. So, in other words, the tantric traditions associate power with the feminine aspect of the divine, and in terms of our humanness, what the corollary of that is that in order to experience your own real power, whether you're a man or a woman, you actually have to get in touch with the feminine aspect of your own consciousness, with the Shakti in your own consciousness. And what I have noticed, having spent, I was a second wave feminist, so the discovery of a feminist perspective on life was a big game changer for me before my spiritual awakening. But one of the things that I think we know is that characteristically male power has kind of needed a kind of feminine support, and men have traditionally looked to women to lend them power, which has been in many ways the basis of gendered relationships throughout the world, and of course in many places in the world. So when we start to recognize that power comes from a feminine source, and that source, though equally in men or in women, actually is expressed differently and felt differently in women, that was when I began to become interested in actually tuning into goddess, and specifically to deity forms, because what I began to experience at a certain point, and I talk about it in my book. It's sort of the introduction to my book, about being in India during a goddess festival, which is a famous goddess festival in India called Navaratri, or the 9 nights dedicated to the goddess Durga, in an outdoor compound with a big statue of the goddess, telling a story, a mythological story, and I suddenly felt this very palpable feminine presence that seemed to be pleased by the fact that I was telling this story about her. I mean, seriously, that's how it felt. That was my experience. And it was as though a kind of awakening took place in that moment, out of which I began to have a different experience of the physical world. So, in other words, when I connected with that subtle sense of Shakti, of feminine presence, it also revealed that this presence is, that the natural world is filled with this presence. So that you look at a tree and you realize a tree is alive and pulsing with Shakti and loves you, and you can love it. It's kind of an extraordinary level of awakening. And from that, I began to become interested in deity practice, in the unique forms, the subtle forms of deity. And as you may know, in the Indian tradition, there are many, many more goddess forms than there are masculine deity forms, interestingly enough. So I just began tuning into individual goddess forms. And by tuning in, I mean investigating the stories, meditating on them, and beginning to realize that though sacred energy is one, that it has many, many flavors and expressions, and that these flavors are not only, they're not just mythological forms. The forms represent energies that express themselves in the natural world, and that also express themselves in the human personality. So I began to be interested in what it means to tune into your own energy as an expression of a particular flavor of sacred energy. And the Hindu goddess forms lend themselves very well to that kind of practice, because there are forms of goddess in Hinduism who are fiery and intense and strong, and there are forms who are very beautiful and harmonious, and there are forms who are all about inspiration and intelligence, and that each of us as a human personality, especially women, once we start to tune into these goddess energies, we start to realize that our own personalities, our own skill sets, our own embodiment actually carries the flavor of one or more aspects of goddess, and that by recognizing and contemplating that it would really change our relationship to our own energy field. So my interest in goddesses is really about how do we divinize, how do we take sacred energy into ourselves, and as it were connect to an exterior form or energetic vortex, which is what I think the goddesses really are. They're energetic. They're really energetic vortexes, such that your mundane body-mind experience begins to be imbued with this feeling of divine connection, of sacred presence living as you. In the Christian tradition, it's sometimes called Transfiguration. In the Christian tradition, there's the understanding that you can take Christ energy into your body and literally be transfigured by it, filled by it.
Yeah.
And there's a very, very strong tradition like that in the Indian deity goddess traditions. So that's actually what I'm interested in and what I teach when I teach goddess is, okay, how do you connect to one of these forms, whether visually or through finding the experience of, say, Lakshmi energy or Durga energy or or Lalita Tripura Sundari energy, which clearly you're embodying. And find the connection and discover how through connecting to a sacred form, you can start to recognize that sacredness, both in yourself, in the physical world, and in people around you. So what I teach when I'm teaching about goddesses is essentially a form of what the Tibetans call deity yoga. Where you invoke the form in order to draw the form into yourself and ultimately recognize that you yourself are a sacred form.
Beautiful, thank you. So I often end interviews by asking if there's a final message that you might have for people who will be watching this, or something that you're just feel impulsively right now that you'd love to share, a message for the world, something that just feels very important to you.
Well, the thing that I think I, like most of us right now, are concerned about is the fact that so much is happening in the world that we cannot turn away from, partly because of global communications. So there's nothing that happens anywhere that we can't become aware of. At the same time, normally there's nothing we can do about it. So as we become witnesses to the upheavals around the world, that what we're really being asked to do is find a way to become part of the solution. That we need to be personally empowered and held in order to be of help anywhere in the world. So I find that what I want to offer, and what I think everyone on the spiritual path is being asked to offer, is first of all practices that can allow us to embody sacred love in our relationships and our interactions with the world, and to also recognize that even as things seem to be falling apart, there's also a current that's running through the universe, which is, the way I experience it is that this current of energy gets behind our spiritual practices almost as though that there's a balance of darkness and light that is being precariously maintained in this world, and that our gift, or that really the gift of this time for people who are interested in maintaining a connection to the light, is that there's a lot of energy for that. So that same energy that is making upheavals is also putting impetus behind our own practice. I believe that it's because this is what's going to save the world. It's going to allow the human race to continue, is if enough of us use the energy that's coming to the planet now to awaken ourselves and live in an awakened way. So I feel that we're in a time of incredible spiritual opportunity. If we can allow ourselves to remember that the opportunity is right there in the middle of the crisis.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, Shakti, and yeah.
Whew. I feel really buzzy. I feel like my eyes have gone out of focus. I'm all buzzy. So we'll just wrap up and say thank you so much for watching, and thank you so much to Sally for sharing your time, your wisdom, your energy.
My pleasure, and I honor the work you're doing.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you.
And thank you to everyone.
Yeah.
For your interest in these matters, which is so beneficial to each other and to the world. Yeah.
Thank you.